Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel Battle War Conflict. Today we're diving into a remarkable chapter of World War II history, the moment when German intelligence realized that the war was slipping away, triggered by the extraordinary construction and scale of Canada's impossible bomber airfield project. The story is as much about infrastructure and strategy as it is about spies, fear, determination, and the shifting tides of war. So sit back as we explore the exterior, interior, performance, safety features, unique selling points, cost in context, and bring it all together in a conclusion. When you look from the outside at the vast stretches of snow-covered Canadian prairie, the expanses of tarmac, the huge steel hangars, the tightly aligned runways, and the lines of bombers waiting patiently, you understand why this was labeled impossible by many in the Axis. The exterior of the base was staggering in its ambition: multiple runways long enough to handle the heaviest bombers, enormous maintenance buildings, accommodation for thousands of aircrew and ground staff, defensive positions, training areas. From a distance you would see a landscape altered by wartime urgency: roads cleared for heavy equipment, rail spurs bringing supplies in, giant workshops humming under their metal roofs, service vehicles constantly moving. The Canadian airfield project pushed the limits of logistics, geography, and wartime economy, and that in itself sent shivers through German intelligence. They saw that a nation far from the European battlefields was moving into the bomber war with industrial scale and strategic deterrence. The exterior told a story of resilience, resources, planning, and the ability to escalate all factors that promised a shift in the balance of air power. For the Germans, watching this meant realizing that the Allies were no longer confined to incremental steps. They were gearing up for large-scale daylight bombing, long-range strike potential, and the ability to project force across continents. That fact alone was sobering. Moving inside, the interior of this bomber airfield and its ancillary facilities is where the real story unfolds in detail. Imagine entering one of the massive hangars, steel trusses stretching high above the floor, rows of heavy bombers parked under the lights, mechanics crawling around the wings, engines being overhauled, spares stacked in crates, trolleys parked beside workbenches. In adjacent buildings, the control rooms buzzed with maps, plotting tables, radios, and intelligence officers tracking aircraft movements. The briefing rooms where crews gathered in the pre-dawn hours sat overlooking the runways through large windows, with telex machines and telephone banks linking out to operational command networks. If you walk through the aircrew accommodation, you'd find men in flying suits, cups of hot coffee steaming in the early morning chill, geometry charts spread out, navigation tasks being planned. Nearby you'd pass the armory where bombs and torpedoes were stored, the logistics hub where fuel trucks lined up, warehouses stacked high with spare engines, propellers, gearboxes. Maintenance bays had overhead cranes lifting entire engines out of bombers for inspection. Fuselages were jacked up, wheels removed, undercarriages checked. You'd also see the training classrooms where new bomber crews studied flight patterns, radar evasion, bombing procedures, and the dreaded flak/gun defense theory. The interior showed that this was not a makeshift installation. It was a self-contained industrial-scale bomber base designed to keep the heavy bombing campaign going, day after day, sortie after sortie. For the Germans, this interior picture must have been deeply unsettling. Their spies and reconnaissance reports would have picked up on the scale of the build-up, the readiness of mechanics, the stockpiles of bombs, the size of the runways and parking areas. The message was loud and clear: this base was designed to endure. The base was not just built for a few months or a tactical operation. It was built for sustained power projection, for heavy bombers to take off, return, refuel, rearm, and strike again with efficiency. That kind of infrastructure meant the Allies were no longer reactive, they were proactive. The Germans realized that even if they fought hard in Europe, the air war was migrating, the backbone of bomber command was shifting, and the resources at Canada's disposal signaled a long-term investment. From the diesel fumes in the maintenance bays to the clanking of tooling, to the navigation charts spread out in briefing rooms, the interior atmosphere bore witness to the shift from defensive war to offensive supremacy. In short, the interior reveals the mechanized beating heart of a bomber operation that the enemy simply could not ignore. When it came to performance, this bomber airfield turned the theoretical into reality. By hosting heavy bombers capable of reaching deep into enemy territory, accommodating rapid turnaround times, and supporting mass sortie launches, it significantly increased Allied operational reach, readiness, and persistence. The capability to launch dozens of bombers in a single wave, with full payloads of bombs, fuel, crews trained and ready, meant the Axis powers could no longer treat Allied air raids as isolated events. They had to assume continuous pressure. The speed of maintenance, the preparedness of crews, the size of stockpiles all added to the performance metrics. The Germans watching this would see that Canada's bomber bases weren't just fortifications, they were launch pads for deep strike, for sustained strategic bombing, and for crippling the enemy's industrial base and morale. Once the bomber airfield reached full operational tempo, the performance advantage unfolded: improved sortie rates, deeper penetration into enemy territory, heavier bomb loads, better logistical support, fewer cancellations due to lack of infrastructure. That shift translated into strategic performance. The Allies could move from localized air raids to broad bombing campaigns, hitting transportation networks, oil plants, aircraft factories, cities, something the German war machine was already feeling. The Dutch, the French resistance, the British and the Americans were all benefiting from this new strategic capability. The Germans realized that their air defense would be stretched, their fighter cover would be challenged, their capacity to shield key assets would be undermined. The performance of the bomber force, backed by Canada's infrastructure, meant they were facing not just occasional raids, but an industrial assault on their war ability. On the matter of safety features, this bomber airfield included everything needed to protect the heavy investment of men, machines, and missions. Safety in this context means both protecting the airfield and protecting the mission continuity, redundancy, fortification, maintenance protocols, crew training, early warning systems, dispersal of aircraft, protective shelters, camouflage, anti-aircraft defenses, backup runways, fuel, dump, separation, bomb storage bunkers. The Germans spying on this would have seen how the Allies took care to safeguard their bomber force. Multiple runways so that if one was damaged, another could still operate. Large crash/fire, response units ready for accidents. Clear separation between maintenance areas and munitions dumps. Bomber parked with spacing to limit chain reaction explosions. Radar and anti-aircraft batteries deployed around the airfield footprint. Camouflage netting, decoy fields, dispersal hard, standings to reduce vulnerability to enemy air attack. The existence of these safety features would reassure Allied command that losses due to accidents or counter-attack would be minimized, and the bomber offensive could continue unhindered. The Germans, evaluating these features, would conclude that this wasn't a vulnerable backwater base. It was built to endure the attrition of war. The safety-first mindset embedded in the airfield's design signaled maturity, readiness, and strategic resilience. For example, the training of crews in emergency egress, fire suppression in hangars, bomb loading protocols, engine maintenance checklists, all meant the operational tempo could be sustained without catastrophic breakdowns. Thus, one more box ticked for the Allies: heavy bombers launching reliably and safely in increasing numbers. The Germans watching this knew that to defeat this effort, they would have to escalate defense far beyond what they had planned, and that realization was chilling. Next, we come to the unique selling points of this airfield project in strategic wartime terms. First, scale: the sheer size of the installation and the ability to host heavy bombers, to maintain them, and to support high sortie rates. Second, distance and protection. Being in Canada, far from the immediate front lines, afforded natural protection and reduced the threat of direct enemy strikes. The Germans recognized that Canada's geography gave the Allies an advantage in building a secure staging base. Third, logistics and redundancy. Many bases in Europe were vulnerable to ground attack, weather or proximity to the front. This Canadian project provided a deep, safe infrastructure with rail links, large maintenance capabilities, stockpiling of spares, fuel, bombs, and large service crews. Fourth, technological and operational integration. This was not simply an airstrip, but a fully integrated operational bomber hub capable of sustained missions. Fifth, morale and psychological impact. When German intelligence observed this, they understood that the Allies were shifting gears from defense to offense, and that alone had great psychological effect. So, the unique selling points boiled down to operational depth, strategic reach, industrial backing, secure geography, and readiness for sustained bombing campaigns. The Germans realized that this base meant the Allies could hit back harder, project power, and maintain pressure. The war wasn't going to be static any longer. Let's talk cost-price in context. In a wartime economy, cost isn't just dollars. It's men, materials, strategic effort, national priorities. The construction of such a bomber airfield demanded vast resources. Land cleared, runways paved to support 8-ton bombers, hangars built, infrastructure laid down, roads, rail, fuel storage, munitions magazines, thousands of personnel trained and housed, supply chains established. While I don't have a precise dollar figure for this specific Canadian bomber airfield, we must understand that for the Germans this represented a major investment by the Allies, one that would pay dividends in the air war. The price to Germany was that they would have to factor this into their war calculations. More fighters, more anti-aircraft, more resources diverted to defense instead of offense, more risk to their industrial base. The Allies paid for this with industrial capacity, manpower, and national will. For Germany, the cost was increased threat, increased resource drain, higher risk that their war effort would be overwhelmed from above. When Spies reported on this base and concluded the war was doomed for the Axis, they were talking about the strategic cost Germany would soon incur in trying to counter such large-scale infrastructure. So we can frame the price not in dollars alone but in strategic terms: a rising Allied bomber capacity, shrinking German margin for error, greater pressure on German resources. In simple terms, the Allies invested heavily and Germany would pay the price. In conclusion, as we reflect on this extraordinary story, it becomes clear why German spies, air intelligence, and war planners looked at Canada's bomber airfield and reached the chilling conclusion that their war was in grave danger. The exterior showed massive scale and readiness. The interior showed a fully functioning, industrialized bomber machine. The performance meant sustained operational air power from a secure base. The safety features meant resilience and durability. The unique selling points signaled strategic depth. The cost translated into shifting advantage. When you put all that together, you see not just a base but a strategic pivot. It meant that the Allies could escalate, hit deep, sustain bombing campaigns, and challenge Germany's dominance in the air. For Germany, this was a red flag moment, one where intelligence recognized that they were facing not just a war of attrition, but a war of strategic infrastructure, industrial might, and global reach. In the broader story of World War II, this episode reminds us that wars are not only won by battles and tactics, but by logistics, forethought, infrastructure, and the ability to mobilize far-flung resources. The bomber airfield in Canada is one of those turning points that shifted the calculus of war, and today, when we look back at how the Allies gained momentum, we can trace part of that to this impossible facility that sent a message the Axis could not ignore. Thank you for watching. If you found this fascinating, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more deep dives into war infrastructure, intelligence, and turning points. Until next time on Battle War Conflict, stay vigilant.